start this again. Hey everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. And welcome to the Music Masterclass. Sorry for the little bit of a late start. Technical difficulties. What's new, right? Hopefully everything's okay. Let me know if things are okay at your end. Just weirdness at mine. Anyhow, this is my regular series where we talk about making music, talk about different aspects of composing, arranging, and general music making. So what we've been doing here, yes, I do have the white cord plugged in, Colleen. Is there an issue? By the way, for people wondering about the white cord, I have two different cords that can be connected to my computer. One of which I need to use when I'm making recordings, and the other one I need to use when I'm doing live. And if I have the wrong one in, bad things happen. So, but I do have the white one in, and hopefully things are okay now. So, so what we're going to be doing is following up on the project that we talked about last week. Remember last week, if you were here, we looked at the March of Welcome from Salieri, the character of Salieri, had composed for Mozart in the movie Amadeus. And the actual genesis of that composition is still a question mark to me. I don't know that we ever found any definitive word on whether this was an actual Salieri composition or not. But it was a nice, simple little piano piece that Mozart then proceeded to play by ear and improvise on and generally talk about. So what we're going to do, and then I played another piece by another basically similar in some ways piano piece, similar in some ways, different in others, longer for sure, more complex a little bit. And so we're going to take a look at that piece and discuss the thing. So what I'm going to do first is just play you the piece. All right. So you're going to get to hear the piece, and then we're going to talk through it. And this time when I play the piece, I am going to turn off the playback of repeats so that we don't hear any repeats. And let's go ahead and hear this piece. So let me get my volume back up on the computer, and let me know if this is working for you volume-wise, but hopefully it is. And get this positioned nicely. Here we go. So this is the piece. Click over here. Oh, how about if I slow it down? By the way, there is an override for people who are not familiar in MuseScore 4. You can override the tempo by dragging the tempo bar. Oops, that's the position slider. Here's the tempo bar. So I dragged the play control. Dragged the play control off the toolbar, and then it exposes that tempo slider. Here we go. This is my favorite part. All right, so that is the piece. A couple of those repeated sections had first and second endings, and so by disabling repeats, we didn't really get to hear both the first and the second ending the way you might expect, but that's fine. So to answer some questions, yes, there were definitely key changes in there, and it's kind of up to you whether you actually notate the key change with a key signature change or not. There's sort of different schools of thoughts on that. Sometimes an 8-bar key change is just not worth notating as such, and it sort of depends on how many of them there are and how extreme they are. So that's but yes, there's definitely different keys, and we're going to talk about the keys. Now, as for the volume thing, I'm going to zoom in on this score so you can see what the thing is. That this score was created in MuseScore 2, and MuseScore 2's dynamics were very different than MuseScore 3's or MuseScore 4's dynamics. So you can see that the beginning of the score is marked with a piano, and at some point it changes to forte. That's a pretty extreme volume difference. And that extreme volume difference probably was underrepresented by MuseScore 2, and I feel like it's probably a little overrepresented in MuseScore 4. Probably in real life, a real pianist, assuming those are even the original dynamic markings, a real pianist playing this probably would have played the piano section a little louder and would have played the forte section a little quieter because, yeah, that was pretty extreme. So that's basically the story there. So sometimes, for the sake of doing stuff like this, I'm actually going to remove all the dynamics just to get rid of them all. Actually, if I select them all, and then here's what I can't remember. If I go to properties, can I turn off the playback of the dynamics? I guess not. I got to just remove them. So bye-bye dynamics. So that's that. And also sometimes on my screen, my playback toolbar, once I undock it, gets a little locked up funny. And so it might be stuck on the screen for a moment here. All right. So let's talk about the fact that there are key changes. And if you get, most of you are on my newsletter list, unless you unsubscribed from it, you would be on the newsletter list, and you would have seen the comment that I put about the key changes on this. And the fact that it starts off in the key of G, right? And so let me play you a G chord. Right? Key of G. Now, in the key of G, the related keys, and first of all, for people who aren't familiar with the concept of related key, any key, so the key of G has one sharp in the key signature. Any key that has either one sharp or one more sharp or one fewer sharp is related. So the key of G has one sharp. The key of E minor also has one sharp. So that's a related key. The key of D has two sharps. The key of B minor also has two sharps. So those are both related keys. Going the other way on the circle of fifths, the key of C has no sharps. The key of A minor also has no sharps. So those are related keys. Under normal circumstances, in music of this general type, these relatively simple piano pieces that are largely diatonic, it's not really complex harmonies. Yes, there's some interesting chromaticism in one of the melodic figures, but for the most part, it's pretty diatonic within each key. You can expect those sorts of simple pieces, when they change keys, to change to related keys. And that is the case in here, but there is one section that is not in a related key. And so I had asked about that, if people heard that, and I did see a couple comments, and so I'm going to take a look at those to talk about the keys. The other thing I'm curious about is, I was paying attention, but only partially while I was playing this. While I was playing it, I was listening to it and thinking about things, but were there any sections that were actually in minor keys, or did it only move to the major keys? That's a good question for you. I I don't offhand remember there being a minor key section, but maybe I just wasn't paying attention there. So y'all can maybe wake me up. Let me know. Was there a minor key section? Let's talk about that. To answer a couple of questions I see coming in, Richard, if you've got a PDF, you can try to scan it, but that's like trying to build a car from a blueprint. It's like basically artificial intelligence. Don't expect it to go very far. On the other hand, if you still have that other program and you can export from that other program directly into music XML format, well, then you can import the music XML file and most of the music will come through pretty well. And Ariana has a question about key signatures also. So this piece is very simple, right? When it's in G, it's in G. When it's in C, it's in C. There's some pieces that just don't have clear tonal centers like that. In my composition, Dusk, that I've used as a demonstration for Muse Sounds before, that doesn't really have clear key centers. There's sections of it that feel like they're basically in the key of F. There's a lot of sections that just don't feel like they're in any key at all. There's other sections that sort of move through keys like really fast, like every couple measures. For pieces like that, I typically don't use any key signature at all. It's just more sensible to me than trying to change keys every few measures. That just gets... It doesn't help me as a reader to see all these key changes and have to keep track of which key I'm in at any given time. If it's that unclear key-wise, I'd rather see no key signature. So, so Richard, other versions of MuseScore, you don't have to do any of that music XML file. This was a MuseScore 2 file, and I just loaded it in, and it just came straight in. So, you don't have to do anything special to get MuseScore 2 files or MuseScore 3 files into MuseScore. Just open them directly. All right, so I'm going to flip over to where some of the discussion is here, and we're going to take a look at the comments that people have made about the keys and talk through these. So John made some comments here and also posted a version of it that I'm going to take a look at here. So this is exactly what what I was aiming for with this. The idea that you might talk through what we're hearing and then try to analyze from there. So he's talking about the first 16 measures. And let me just play the first 16 measures again. In fact, since the first 16 measures is really a repetition, I'm really just going to play the first, I'm just going to play the first phrase, all right? And again, I'm going to shrink it down so y'all don't see too much of what's going on. Right? So that is the first 8 bars that, if repeated, becomes the first 16. And so his observation is it's in 3/4, and yeah, it is. It would be possible to call that a real slow 6/8, right? 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a, or if you want to think of it in terms of the little beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. But it would be totally possible to notate it as 6/8, but notating this type of music in 3/4 is more traditional. That tempo, that feel, waltz feel, yeah, it's expected to be in 3/4. So he's talking about that there's 1 chord per measure, and it's 1 to 5, and then back to 1, right? So it's boop-a-dum, bum, bum-ba-dum, boop-a-dum, bum, bum-ba-dum, right? And then that same thing basically repeats. Bum-ba-dum, bum, bum-ba-dum, boop-a-dum, or whatever the melody is. I've already forgotten the exact melody, but something like that, right? So it's that pattern, 1 to 5, and then 5 to 1. 1 to 5, 5 to 1, which is essentially the same pattern as that Salieri march, right? If you remember that, that was essentially the same pattern. Let me pin my chat here, so if I'm missing something here. One thing about, Ariana, your comment about the key signatures is, yeah, unfortunately, there is no way to distinguish key of C from no key. There is no visible, they both use no key signature. It's just something you learn from experience. When you look at a score, if you don't see if you see no key signature and you don't see many accidentals, then you're going to be, okay, well, this piece is probably in C. John, it's not frozen for me, so maybe refresh your screen. So if you see no key signature on a key, on a piece, it might be in C, it might be in A minor, or it might not have a key. And you're going to have to like do some detective work to figure that out. That's just a fact of life of how music notation works. So when you look at a piece, if you look at it and you see stuff that makes you think, hey, it's in the key of C. I see a lot of C chords happening. I see not a lot of accidentals. If I see outlining of C triads, I see that sort of thing, then you know it's in C. Same thing if A minor, if you see a bunch of G sharps, that's the leading tone in A minor. But if what you're seeing looks random, like what you'll see in Dusk, you'll see all these accidentals in kind of random places all over the place. You'll figure out that, hey, I guess it's not in the key of C, and it doesn't matter. You just read the notes. But if you want to understand the piece, you got to study it, and that's just kind of the way it is. So John's talking about the melody here being arpeggios. Bum ba dum bum bum ba dum. Now, when he talks about walk-ups, so John, if you're back, then you can maybe tell me exactly what you mean. But think about that melody. I'm going to sing it the way I remember it. Bum 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 bum. Bum bum bum. Right, that is an arpeggio. Bum 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 bum, and that's an arpeggio coming down the D chord. So usually if we talk about walk-ups, I'm thinking of a stepwise motion, and I think of that as being something I associate with bass lines moving by step. So obviously you're using the term a little differently than what I have in mind. So if you're back, John, if you're not frozen, you could maybe elaborate on that. But so if I want to figure out that melody, I'm going to listen to it one more time. This time I'm going to focus a little more on the melody. Focus more on melody. Dun da da dun da 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 dum. Dun da 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 dum. I gotta sing through that to make sure I know it. I don't necessarily have to, but I'm thinking aloud, and frankly, I do sing to make sure I know these things. So one thing I had wrong that I didn't realize until that, it's bum ba dum bum bum ba dum bum. That note actually repeats. My memory of it didn't have the repeated note. I had to listen to it again. Remember that. So bum 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 bum. That is an arpeggio of a G major chord. The question is, what note did it start with? Bum, bum, bum. Did it start on the root? Did it start on the third? Did it start on the fifth? That's a question for you. Feel free to answer. What is your first note? I'll tell you my answer. I mean, I know the answer, but I'll tell you how I would get the answer. When I hear a piece like that, I'm not hearing the first note and saying, oh, that starts on the third or that starts on the fifth. I don't necessarily hear that. I hear when the root happens, and then I work backwards. Bum, 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 boom, bum, that one's the root. Boom, bum, bum. So now that I know that one's the root, or in this octave, I can kind of work backwards from there. Boom, bum, 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 right? And then bum, 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 bum. Boo-ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum. And that one is a half note. Then boo-ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum. And I've already forgotten that little melody that I just sang. I waited too long. Boo-ba-da-da, boo-boo-ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Did I get that right? I don't know, but I'm gonna find out. Dun, dun. Okay, there it is. So yeah, my memory of the piece didn't capture some of those details on the first listen, and I had to listen to it a few times before those details popped up. So John also had some other comments in here that I'm gonna look at here. And the melody is, so he talks about triplets on beat one, followed by quarter notes. And so you're describing the rhythm. And yes, in places where there's arpeggiated eighth notes. And yes, so you're just describing the rhythm. That's great. And you did post the thing. So instead of offset triplets, it sounds more like dotted eighth. And yeah, that's the thing is the difference between dotted eighth and triplets. You know, if you hear bum 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 ba-dum, I wouldn't say you're wrong. But if you also heard bum 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 subdivided into 16th notes, you know, that's actually, I think, you know, what's actually happening here. If I zoom in, you'll see it really is notated as dotted eighth 16th. But frankly, the difference to our ears can be subtle. And, you know, if a computer is playing it, it's going to be precise. If a human is playing it and you're trying to learn it from a human performance, frankly, in a piece like this, I wouldn't be at all surprised to hear many people play those dotted eighth 16ths more like triplets. They might actually end up somewhere between triplets and dotted eighth 16th. That's entirely possible. So I want to talk about the left hand a little bit, okay? So yes, and you can absolutely use the metronome. You can actually slow it down and do things, but I'm a big fan of trying to get as much as possible done in my head without relying on external tools. And you'll see me doing things like counting on my fingers to work out complicated rhythms. You know, these aren't complicated rhythms, but often you'll see me doing stuff like that when we do these ear training exercises. I want to talk a little bit about the left hand right now. And, you know, we definitely hear a boom, ching, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick, right? We hear that type of pattern, you know, but I don't know the exact notes yet. I mean, I think I sort of do, but I want to talk a little bit about my process there. John has already correctly identified that it is a 1 chord going to a 5 chord, but let's listen a little bit to the voicings. And first I want to check the roots. I want to check the bass notes, the boom, and see if it's really going the roots. I want to know if it's going boom, boom, or if it's going bum, bum, right? Is it playing the third of that 5 chord? I don't think it is. I think it's the roots, but I want to listen to be sure. So, boom, bum, bum. I'm trying to get the octave right. Bum, 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 bum. Listen again with me and make sure that you agree with that. Oops, start it over. So actually, this slider here is maybe the best, most reliable way, or the rewind button. Ooh, the last one went up to a G. Oops. The last one went up to a G. It didn't come back down to the G. I just realized that. I hadn't heard that before. So that's what I'm hearing as far as the bass notes. Now, frankly, does it matter what octave I play the bass note in? No. I mean, if I'm trying to do an exact, absolute, perfect note-for-note transcription of this, yes, I want to get those details exactly perfectly right. But the point I made as a sort of preface to all the discussion we did last week about Amadeus was often when you hear someone say, hey, so-and-so just played this piece back perfectly by ear, perfectly smurfically. It might not have been perfect. It might have been just close enough to convince people that it was perfect. And there's a lot of details you can get off, and no one's going to know the difference. And so what octave I played that root in is no one's going to even notice the difference. I mean, if you played them exactly back to back, yeah, people will say, hey, that sounded a little different there. But in general, those details just don't matter because it still captures the essence of the piece. What I do want to do is check that chord, though. It's boom. It's some version of this chord. So there's two things that I want to know about this chord. One is how dense it is, and the other is what the top note is. Those are the two things that I want to figure out. And again, I'm not going to try to do this by slowing it down. I just want to get it by hearing it. So I'm going to play this and be listening to that chord, and let's hear if that upper chord is a 2-note chord like this, or if it's spread out more like that, or if it's a 3-note chord like this, or maybe it's here, maybe it's there, right? I don't know what inversion it's in or anything, but let's first try to get the density. right? That chord. Was it this? Or was it that? Or was it something else? Someone, put in the chat what you think that chord was there. That first chord, the G chord. And I'll tell you a little bit about my process here. You've probably maybe seen it on screen when I didn't have it zoomed out far enough, and you might have seen it already, but let's just listen to it and see if we can get it. How dense of a chord was that? Was that a 2-note chord? Was it a 3-note chord? Was both the 1 chord and the 5 chord the same density? Were they both 3-note chords? Were they both 2-note chords? Or was one of them a 2-note chord and the other a 3-note chord? These are all possibilities. Let's hear it again. What do you think? What do you think? So I'm going to tell you. So the last one was 3, first were 2. That's so I'll tell you right now that is a determination. I'm approaching it from that level first because I think it's an easy question to ask, but a harder question to answer. I can't tell how many notes are playing all the time. What I do, I'll try to get an initial guess, and then I'm going to try to find the notes. And so what I want to do is I want to rely on something that I talked about with the piece from Amadeus. I want to hear the top note of the chord. The top note of the chord is usually the most prominent note we hear in the chord. And I want to hear that line. And so I'm going to think through this. I'm going to use my knowledge of theory a little bit to think through this. If it was a G chord going to a D chord as a triad, I'm going to expect the top note could be G going to F sharp going to G, or it could be B going down to A, or it could be B going up to C if it's a C, if it's a D7, C coming down to B, or it could be a D on top. D, 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 D. So I want you to be thinking about that, all right? Be thinking about that top note as we listen to it again. I'll slow it down a little bit more because, we can, but I don't want to go too crazy with the slowing down. So tell me about the top note. What did you hear? Did you hear G to F sharp back to G? Or did you hear B down to A back up to B? Or did you hear B up to C, C back down to B? Or did you hear D to D to D to D? Let's hear that again. And I'm sorry that people are having freezing problems on my system here. It all seems fine, so I apologize for that. I do expect that usually refreshing the screen will fix most problems. It shouldn't really be very necessary to log. Well, first of all, don't log out and log back in, but maybe close that tab and then go back to another tab. But usually refreshing the screen should be enough to fix any temporary glitches you have. Unfortunately, I have no control of what happens after the stream leaves my computer, and it hasn't been a problem on my computer. So unfortunately, there's nothing much I can do about that. But let's hear this again, and just pay attention to that top line again, and give me your answers. So the thing that I'm most aware of personally is the C. I'm very aware of a C when we get to that D chord. I'm much less aware of almost anything else, but I'm quite aware of that C. So I'm hearing that note. So I know my D7 chord is a D7 chord. My 5 chord has the 7th on it because I can clearly hear that C. And now my brain is telling me it's probably resolving back down to B. And I want to verify that because it's possible it could be going up to a D, but I don't think so. But I want to verify it. up to D. I didn't hear it go up to D. So I'm going to say it came back down to B. And so I'm also going to say it probably started on B. So I'm probably hearing this or, right? One of these variations here. So what I want to do now is ask myself about, oh, great, you're back, John. I want to ask myself, can I hear the line going from G to F sharp? I expect that that's probably in there because I would expect that. I would expect that chord voicing to have the G going down to F sharp, probably. Unless it's really prominent in the melody. If the melody is mostly about the G's and the F sharps, then I'll expect it not to be doubled in the left hand. But if the melody, and if you think about that melody, it passed through the G, but it didn't dwell there. There's no F sharp in there at all, right? So I got to imagine that F sharp was in there. But now I'm going to explicitly listen for it. And I will tell you right now, I've got headphones on. Headphones are great for this. And good, no, not even good headphones. These headphones, oh yeah. These headphones cost me $7 at Target. They are cheap headphones, but they are way better than my $200 AirPods as far as being able to hear things clearly because they're over the ear headphones. AirPods have great features, have great ability to do a lot of things, but for certain types of purpose, something that's an actual over the ear thing, even if it's cheap quality, can do really, really, really well, better than some high-end earbuds. So, yeah, this is what I typically use. That's why I have these in here. So now I just want to listen for that and hear if I can hear that F sharp. And sometimes I'll sing along to decide if I can hear it. So I hear the F sharp clearly. I'm vaguely hinting at it here. I'm going to sing it really quietly, and I'm going to play this line here. And I'm quite positive I hear the F sharp. I'm less positive I hear the G. I think it's more my brain telling me I must be hearing the G. But I clearly hear the F sharp. Let's listen to that again. So that's what I've heard. I've definitely heard the F sharp. I'm pretty sure I heard the G. Then the question is, am I only hearing that? Or is there also a low D in there? Is that tenor voice in that sound or not? Because I'm pretty sure there's not a D sitting on top of all that. But is there a D in the middle there? That's the next question. Oh, and then Richard, you've got a really great observation here about harmonics. Yeah, so the thing is, ears can be easily fooled in listening to chords to hearing notes that aren't technically being played simply because the overtones of the notes that are being played, depending on the sounds you're using, and especially in organ sounds, which are deliberately built using overtones in many cases, you can easily get fooled into hearing notes that aren't present. And that's just, unfortunately, a fact of life. So, yeah, sometimes you'll be fooled. But then the trick is, well, then play it yourself and ask yourself if it's there. So Ariana is saying there is the low D, and I'm inclined to believe you, but let's listen. Is it there, though? Was it there? I heard it on the first chord. Did I hear it on the second chord is the question. So was it there on that second chord? I'm not actually positive about that. Well, okay, here's the deal. It was the bass note. That's the problem. That's the deal. It's the bass note. It's that. That's what it is. Now, was there an A in there? Did he try to make up the difference and said, well, the first one has all three notes. Should I put three notes in here, or should I just do this? Was there an A in the second chord? we're getting into some details here that are requiring repeated listens to get. But I wanted to go through this first phrase because, this is the one most people did. And then I want to get to my favorite melodic phrase. I feel like it's just this is what I feel. And, you could listen to it over and over and decide, and then I'd play it with the melody. Oops. Right, something like that. All right, so I'm going to zoom in and see how we did here with our discussion. And that's a lot of discussion just about two chords, right? But this is the point. It's easy to first hear that there's a 1 chord and a 5 chord, and I could have guessed a lot of things, and I might have gotten details wrong. I might have gone and been a little bit off on some of the details, but it would have been fine, right? No one would have said, hey, you're not doing that right, unless they really studied the piece. It would have been very believable if I had gone, if I played this here and then played this and played this like that. No one would have said, hey, you're not doing it right. They probably would have listened to it and said, hey, you nailed it. So, but if you want to get the details, then this is my process for getting the details. All right, I want to flip over to the section now that's got the crazy chromaticism here, and take a look at this. It's not crazy chromaticism, it's just a little bit. So it stays in G. So if we look at the actual sheet music here, we talked about key changes. Notice the next phrase, which I'm not gonna go into because it's still pretty simple. This next phrase this is now in the key of D. It's a 5 chord going to a 1 in the key of D, right? I'm not going to go through that by ear. I just want to point out that was still 1 chords and 5 chords, but now in the key of D, and there was no key signature written for that, right? So this is a pretty typical thing that the next phrase would be in the key of the original 5. That is probably the single most common modulation there is in this type of music. Whatever key you start in, you'll expect to see another section in the key of the original 5. So the key of G, the 5 is D. You're going to expect to see phrases in D. And one reason for that is it's really nice at the end of that section. You can then hear that 1 chord as the 5 chord and come back to 1. 5, getting into the key of the 5 can feel pretty abrupt, but coming from that key of the 5 back to 1 always feels really smooth, because all it requires is the brain to reinterpret that D chord it just heard as, I was hearing this as the 1 chord in the key of D, now I'm hearing it as the 5 chord in the key of G. And the brain does that really, really well. The fact that this piece jumps directly to the secondary dominant is kind of noteworthy, because it's a little unusual. Let's listen to this. That jumping directly from the G chord to the secondary dominant A chord. So secondary dominant, if you use that term, that's implying we're still in the key of G. If I want to say that we've moved to D, I'm just going to call it the 5 in the key of D. But in any case, there was no transitional chord. In other words, there wasn't a chord placed here like going to the D chord first, or there was not, or starting off on the G chord, then going to the A chord, then coming to D. This was a fairly abrupt transition as these things go. And so there was mention, Richard saying starting to sound like a Baroque style. One thing is that this aspect of it feels like a departure from the Baroque, right? Nothing about the beginning is anything that Bach wouldn't have written, right? Those first 8 bars, you might have expected to see this piece in the Anna Magdalena notebook, right? Or so Bach or one of his friends may easily have written those first 8 bars. But that transition from just ending on a G chord and then immediately jumping into this A7 chord, the 5 chord of D. I'm not saying Bach never did that, but it is starting to feel like it's a little bit more modern harmonically. And then if I flip to this spot here, I want to listen to this spot here, the fun part. I want to start a little measure early because it takes my playback a moment to catch up. Start here. So yes, this piece is much later, right? This is if you saw the date of the composer here, Alkan, it is squarely in the middle. I don't know when it was written, but I'm going to guess somewhere in the middle there, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1850. So yes, this would have been a Romantic era as far as such things go. Now the piece doesn't have any hugely romantic elements to it. It has a very classic feel to it. But, you know, that's because it's written in a very specific style, this polka mazurka style, which I also referred to as a waltz based on that rhythm there. So let's talk about that melody, that do 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 ba do do da, right? That sort of interestingly angular melody. I want to get that melody. I want to get it. And so we're going to listen to it a couple times. And I'm going to set my loop point right here. And can I do that? I can set a loop beginning here. And see if this works. So I'll tell you right now, Balm is my root. Remember where we started? Balm is my new root. We are in the key of C. So this is one of the things you will want to sort out is what key are we in at this point. But I'll tell you right now, that is where we're at. Now, if you want to isolate just the melody, the way to do that will be to select the bottom staff. Let's zoom in a little more so I can get that more accurate. I'm going to select the contents of the bottom staff and turn off playback. So that would be a way to isolate the now that little figure there, that second phrase, I'm going to play that again. I guess my loop is turned off again now. I moved my loop point. Let me start that piece at the beginning here. This phrase right here. Did that phrase remind anyone of anything? You have to be about as old as me or older to remember this, but most of you are. That second phrase reminds me of something I remember from my childhood. And I'll give you a moment to think about that. So I'm going to do it with the chord. So I'm going to undo the change that I just made so that when I play, we'll play the chords because, you know, it was useful to hear just the melody, but I don't want to do that. So listen to this part coming right here. I often can relate pieces to other pieces, and that one is strongly relating. It's relating to something that I remember from childhood, and I'll tell you what it is in a moment. I'm going to play it one more time because it's not identical, but it's close, and then y'all can look it up later and tell me if I'm imagining this. That boo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-dum. Something like that. Remember that piece, Music Box Dancer, big pop hit in the 70s? Probably the only solo piano piece that was ever played on the radio as a pop song, Music Box Dancer. Anyhow, directly lifted from this. That 2-bar phrase was that one, more or less. So anyhow, I'm going to listen to that phrase again, and this time try to focus a little more on that melody, and I'm just going to try to sing it to myself. There's actually something really curious to me about that piece. There's one note in there that I didn't expect to be there, and I don't like. I'm going to say I think I would have chosen differently, and I actually want to understand it a little bit. But I'm going to, take a look at it and try to get inside this one note. So, I wouldn't literally say the composer of Music Box Dancer literally knew this piece. It's, there's only so many ways to play a 1-chord and a 5-chord and build melodies around them. It's just similar. That's all. Lots of pieces sound similar to others, and it's just a little observation, about a similarity that happens to exist. All right, so I'm going to tell you about the note that I feel like is a little like, why is that there? And it's a C. I'm going to tell you right now, it's a C. I think that piece comes back to C in a place that feels wrong to me, like it didn't need to come back to C there. And then we'll talk about that. So here comes the thing. Do 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 ba dum bum. It came back to C, and then ba da bum comes back to C again. Why did it do that? Boo da da ba da boo ba dum bum goes all the way down to C there, and then ba da bum and returns to the C again. That feels odd to me. It's noteworthy, and it helped me remember what's going on in there, but I didn't like it that much. Maybe it's because he uses the E here. I guess he felt like he needed to go back down to the C. He or she, actually, is this Maria? No, I don't know. Maxime, is that a woman's name? The piece is a woman's name. I don't know. So sorry if I don't know the gender of the person who wrote this. Would I have liked that better with an E in there? I don't know. But here is that melody here. There's something about the repeated C there that bothers me more than if there had been a repeated E in there. And I guess their thinking was, well, they already started the phrase on the E, and that would have been 3 E's. And I don't know. What do you all think? You hear what I'm saying? I'm getting past now just I'm doing what Mozart did in the movie, right? I'm learning it by ear, but I'm also second guessing the choices as we go along. And this is how we learn, so I'm doing it. If I went to a G, then I'd have that repeated G that I wouldn't like. I kind of like that better. I kind of like not landing on the C until the end of the phrase, personally. That is my personal feeling. So, so we're talking about the process of composing, and but it's also about the process of learning things by ear, because I think this is one of the mistakes that we're all likely to make when when learning a piece by ear. Our ear is going to substitute what we think the composer probably would have written. It's the ear hears what it wants to hear sometimes. It's kind of the auditory illusion. If you think about an optical illusion where your eye sees what it thinks it's going to see, not what it's really seeing, the ear does the same thing. It hears sometimes what it expects to hear rather than what's actually there. And sometimes there's certain notes like that if you just tried to get that by ear, I might have just accepted the E personally, because I would have guessed E, played it that way, and accepted it. But it was when I listened to it, that C jumped out at me as unexpected. And that's often a good way then to correct yourself. When you listen to things, what's jumping out at you is unexpected. Well, those are the notes you wouldn't have chosen. And then you think about, what note would I have chosen? And then understand what they did that's different. So yeah, that's just an observation. What's interesting to me about that line is I originally described it as being chromatic, but is it really? I mean, that is, the F sharp is the only accidental in that line. And then again, 4 bars later, right? It is not actually very chromatic at all. What it is, though, is angular. It's angular. And Joanne, for me, your "has the chat stopped working" is visible. Richard had a comment, "I like the C." You had a comment before that, "It's very tempting to try to improve." So those are working for me. But sometimes it doesn't scroll. Sometimes you might have to scroll it manually. And yeah, sometimes it's just, there's glitchy stuff going on. But these are all visible for me. So on my end, it's all okay. So anyhow, that line is not as chromatic as I imagined it to be when I first heard it. It's because of the angularity of it. So let's talk about what I mean by angularity. So we're aiming for the G, but we don't go to the G. We're overshooting the G, right? This, if you think about a C chord, right, going from the 3rd to the 5th chromatically, that would be common. That's a Scott Joplin, right? It's one of the rags. I don't know. That would have been an expected thing. But so doing this chromatic lead in to that G, but then not hitting the G, overshooting it and coming back to it. This is combining the idea of a passing tone, these chromatic passing tones. It's combining that with what in jazz terms we might call an enclosure. We are approaching this G with a lower neighbor as well as an upper neighbor, but it's not really a neighbor because there's G. So the technical term for it, maple leaf, thank you. So we are approaching that G with an F sharp from below and an A from above. If you think about the classical definitions of non-chord tones, the F and the F sharp would be considered passing tones because they are connecting from the E to the G. These are passing tones, but they're not resolving directly. Instead, we have what's called an appoggiatura above it, a non-chord tone above the G that then comes back, and that appoggiatura is on the beat, characteristic of a lot of appoggiaturas. So the fact that we have this passing tone figure that then jumps to an appoggiatura, it's yeah, and I couldn't remember which one because they all blend together in my head. I'd have to start from the beginning of both of them to even tell you which one of you is right. But yeah, it's one of the two is what I think. Yeah, so entertainer, that makes sense. Because that also has that chromatic passing tone, right? So this chromatic approach that then doesn't resolve, but instead jumps to an appoggiatura, comes back. This is not Bach. This is where it starts to feel much more modern, in keeping with the century in which it was actually written. It's a very 19th century and later device. You wouldn't even see Mozart really doing that kind of line so much, Not that never, but it's more typical of this is the first part of the piece that starts to feel more actual romantic era than classical era in terms of these things. So, Graham, I would use the term strain. That's the official ragtime term. We talk about the first strain, second strain, strain. That's usually the term that we use. But yeah, it's the phrase. It's the second portion of the piece. So anyhow, this type of figure of twisting and turning to approach chord tones, and then that big leap, and then leaping back up to an appoggiatura and leaping back down again. That's all the kind of stuff. Yes, it's arpeggiating, but it's arpeggiating in sort of interesting rhythmic ways, right? It almost feels like if I reimagine that melody, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? It almost feels like this phrase is not in bottom, bottom, which is what it really is. It really is that 1 and 2 and 3, and it's really in 3. And yeah, there's an aspect of this phrase, 1, that feels like this is 1 and 2 and 1 and right? There's a sense in which the grouping of these notes in the melody is a hemiola figure, is the term we use. It's a grouping of 3 against the beat. It's groupings of 3 notes in terms of where the direction changes happen, right? So those direction changes are happening at sort of unexpected places. This is what I mean when I refer to something as being angular. It's going to have changes of direction in unexpected places. And so it fooled my ear into thinking of this as being more chromatic than it actually was. But it's actually the angularity of the melody, the changes of direction in unexpected places, and large changes of direction. Leap up and then leap down of octaves, right? And then leap up to that arpeggio, to that appoggiatura, and then more leaping down, and then it's just very because you can have arpeggios, and no one's going to call that angular because it's just going up and down the arpeggio. But it's these changes of direction within the line on offbeats and so forth. This creates this angular feeling. So when you learn the melody, those are one of the things you want to sort of point out to yourself. Oh, wow, there's some unexpected changes of direction in there, and sort that out in your head. And I love to try to sing this thing. Bam, boo da 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 boo da bam, boo da da ba da ba da boo ba da bum, da 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 boo da ba da bum. I'm casually looking at the screen, but I'm mostly doing it from memory. That's a fun melody to sing. I'm not saying I'm going to sing it well, but it was fun. Anyhow, that's what I got time for here today. So we'll play ourselves out here. And yeah, thanks for being part of this conversation and really getting inside some of the things. I mean, I started talking about playing it by ear, but also talking about what I'm learning about the piece, what I'm learning about music in general by going through the process. Now, a couple people posted their transcriptions of portions of it, but I want to give people more time. I want to give people, hopefully you were inspired by a little of this and you want to try to learn some other phrase for yourself. So next week, I'll come back to it again and we'll look at some of what people have posted to, just take a look at your transcriptions and, what's been going on in them. And, we'll also go on and talk about other things too. But I think there's a lot to learn, a lot of things to learn just by looking at this one fairly simple piece. So by all means, keep working on it, post some more answers and post more music, whatever. We'll keep doing this. See you all next time. Bye. Thank you.